Hello, welcome back to this channel. Today we're going to be talking about Creature Commandos, because I don't like it very much. um, so generally when I make videos for this channel, my goal is not to be like negative per se. This is probably going to be a different type of video for that reason, because I have a lot of thoughts about Creature Commandos, and I've been seeing mostly positive reactions to it, but I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of issues here that aren't really being addressed, at least not on my space of the internet, which could be very different from yours, so I don't know. I do want to clarify a couple of things first, though. Number one, I am not some Snyder bro, endless like James Gunn is trash and the DCU is gonna flop and we should bring back the whatever. That's not my vibe. I don't like Zack Snyder's movies very much, and I really don't care one way or the other if the DCEU as it was continued in its current state. I like in general that we get lots of different types of projects across the DC universe. So I don't really like one shared continuity one way or the other. So that's just my personal stance on it. I should also say that I'm not one of those weird like anti-woke crazy nut jobs, because I don't even know what that could possibly mean. That's just stupid. So don't worry about that. If that's what you're looking for with this video, or if that's what you're worried you're going to see, don't worry. That's not what you're going to see. Instead, I'm just a guy who in the past has actually really enjoyed James Gunn's works, especially superhero movies. Like The Suicide Squad is one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. Like even one of my favorite movies, just in general. Like I love it so much. And I really like Peacemaker, and the Guardians movies are great. The third one wasn't my favorite, but I really like the second one. I think that they're not perfect movies, but they're a lot of fun, and they're very emotional, very well filmed compared to other MCU projects. So on the whole, I don't have any issues with James Gunn necessarily, but this project just did not make any sense to me whatsoever, and for a couple of reasons. Some context, because some of you might not have seen the show and maybe just are curious about it. The basic plot for Creature Commandos is that after the ending of Peacemaker season 1, there was like a whole thing where Amanda Waller's daughter announced the existence of the Suicide Squad, and they had to disband it for legal reasons. But Amanda Waller now is like, well, it's not a human rights violation if I don't use humans. So hence Suicide Squad 2.0, now they're called the Creature Commandos. And their job for this season is to protect this princess of this country called Polkolistan. Polkolistan? For some reason that nation's name keeps like, it's made up, but it just keeps like escaping me. I don't know why. But in any case, they have to protect her because the evil sorceress Cersei is trying to kill her for reasons unknown at the time. So the squad isn't commandos, whatever, is in charge of protecting her until eventually they do take down Cersei, and they take her back to find out that she actually says that the princess is evil and that she's going to destroy the world, and the reason Cersei's stopping her is because she had a vision about it. So they bring in this doctor to check, and they're like, yeah, no, she tends to have prophetic visions, so yeah, it's probably true. So they send the squad instead. They send the commandos instead to go kill the princess. But Rick Flag Sr., who's in charge of the group, ends up figuring out that the doctor is actually Clayface. So he's like, well, then she was lying, and actually Cersei's making the whole thing up, and the princess isn't evil. So now they have to try to get the message to the commandos to stop killing the princess, except at the end they find out that no, the whole time the princess was evil. And she hired Clayface to pretend to be the doctor so that it made it look like the doctor was fake in order to discredit Cersei. So they killed the princess, and that's the end of season 1. A lot of people died, and that's all there is to it. So the episodes in the season itself are not that long, but like half of the show is just flashback segments. So to sort of emulate that, I'm going to break this video down into 2 parts. The first part, we're going to be talking about the issues I have with the Creature Commandos themselves. So we're going to be talking about their backstories, their origins, and how they fit into the team, and why I don't think it worked, and why I think it's probably one of the biggest issues with the show. And then the second part, we're going to talk about the plot and how I think they could have changed the plot in order to better service the overall vibe of the show, because I don't want to explain why the plot's bad and then not give you an example of how they could have done it better, in my opinion. And again, everything's my opinion, so if you like the show, just fine. Just remember that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with liking the show. There's nothing wrong with me disliking the show. My suggestions are not inherently better. They're just what I would have preferred, because I'm me, and of course I would prefer the things that I like, but I digress. Let's get into it. Starting off with the character that isn't on the Commandos the least, we're going to start with G.I. Robot. And I know off the bat people really like G.I. Robot, and I honestly like him too. I thought he was fun, but I have a little bit of an issue with his backstory and the way it's presented in the show, and the paths they just don't venture down when they talk about him. The main issue I have with the way his story is told is that I think it'd be very interesting to explore the idea of making a man solely for the sake of killing, because in America and in Western civilization, really all across the world, there's this issue where men are essentially told that they are only around to kill and to fight and to hunt, and that is their only purpose, that they are not here for compassion, for love, for companionship, for none of that. The important thing is for them to work hard and to fight to survive. And it's weird because obviously G.I. Robot in this instance is literally built for that. But the thing he values, of course, is his camaraderie with his friends. Except his camaraderie is built off the fact that they appreciate him for being a killing machine. And I think that's an interesting thing to explore, because when you look at a lot of like real life soldiers and real life police officers especially, there is a sort of camaraderie that's formed around the person who is able to be the best at their job, in the sense that they're the most violent and they're the most capable of being, I don't know, killing machines in a lot of instances. I think a really good example of a show that tackled that subject is the show Barry. If you don't know, it's about a guy who used to serve in the military, but then he comes back to America and ends up becoming a hitman, but then he wants to become an actor. It's a funny show, but it's also like super dark. It's interesting. It's on HBO. But in an episode, we see the first time that he killed someone while he was overseas, and how the reaction from his comrades was literally like they were freaking out, like he just like got like a headshot in a video game. Like they're like, "Oh my God, bro, that was wild!" And they're like jumping up and down and like cheering for him. And it reminded me a lot of the way that they were cheering for G.I. Robot. But when we look at in Barry how people are imagining the scene played out, they assume, of course, that the response would be complete despair. The fact that like they took a life and it's like, oh God, what have we done? We're murderers now. Like they assume that it has to have some sort of major emotional consequence for the people in that area, but no. Instead, they're just happy about it, because for a lot of men, they don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as cool and interesting. And for Barry specifically, it was fun for him because this is the first time people were actually appreciating him and seeing him as someone of value and not just some weirdo in the corner. It's very, very similar to G.I. Robot, except in Barry, there's like a larger conversation about how people will glorify violence and how they will look at it as like the important thing for a man, and how a lot of times the people who are focused on emotions don't really fully understand what men are going through, or really how like people become violent or what pushes them down those paths, and they're only good at like vaguely emulating emotions. It's an interesting show. Creature Commandos isn't, because G.I. Robot dies and they never really discuss any of it. Like they don't go into any of what that was supposed to mean. And it's especially annoying because, you know, he gets taken in by this collector and he's a Nazi, and there's nothing really we can say about the fact that he kills all of them because, like, they're Nazis. Like, what are we gonna do? Have sympathy for them? It feels almost like the show kind of wants us to, because it's like the guy's just some lonely dude who just wanted his robot to be his friend, and it's like, oh, we're a family and we have cats. But then it's like, no, he's a Nazi. So, like, I don't feel sympathy for him. It's weird because the show never really goes into like whether or not it was like right or wrong to kill the Nazis, because it's like, of course it wouldn't necessarily be the wrong thing, but like, you know, he's a robot. He doesn't really have a choice in these matters. That's what his programming is. And if you're going to say he can evolve past that, they don't really get a chance to talk about that. So he just feels like he's just kind of like an empty concept. It's like, I don't know, he started off killing Nazis and he ended up killing Nazis. And his friendship with his like fellow soldiers isn't really anything we explore or talk about. It really comes up again with the Commandos. So it's kind of weird and kind of annoying, and I don't know. It just didn't really leave a good taste in my mouth, and it was where I started going, I don't know about this show. This feels a little excessive. Up next, we have Weasel, and I don't really have any issues with Weasel per se. I think his story is a little cliche, and the tie they make between the kid that he was friends with and the fact that she looks similar to the princess is kind of lazy. It's like a very convenient way of making him relevant to the story outside of just simply being there. And I don't know. I don't really have any issues with him being there. I don't really have any issues with his story. I think the biggest issue is the fact that we don't really have time to talk about his backstory in a way that really feels relevant to the show. It's a neat thing to see, but there's not enough time to build up him as a character for that emotional gut punch to really hit. I feel like with shows like this, when you have a character that's sort of distant and like hard to understand and maybe just there for comedic relief, it's interesting to see those like hints at there being depth slowly laid over the course of a season. So when we actually get the reveal of how he is like someone who has a lot more depth about him, then it hits harder. But because the show moves at such a breakneck pace and doesn't really have any time to build up that kind of stuff, it's just another tragic backstory in the long list of tragic backstories in the show. Speaking of which, Dr. Phosphorus. I hate Dr. Phosphorus. And not because I dislike Alan Tudyk. I like Alan Tudyk, but oh my God, this character is so... First off, the whole point is that Amanda Waller is looking for people who aren't human. They don't have rights. Dr. Phosphorus is very clearly a human. Like, he's a metahuman, I guess, but he's very clearly a human. And if that's how thin the line is like, well, as long as you're someone who's less human than normal, then that's stupid. Like, I don't know. If the whole point is you're trying to avoid legal battles, she's not doing a very good job of it. That may sound nitpicky, but also, like, I don't know. It's the show called Creature Commandos. I would hope that they'd be actual, like, creatures, but whatever. He's a creature-ish. The big problem I have with Dr. Phosphorus's origin story is that it's so unrelated to anything about this show, to like the premise or like the concept of being like this outcast creature character. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. If you take away the fact that he looks like a skeleton now, let's say that the scenario played out exactly the same, except after he was irradiated, he just simply has melty superpowers now, nothing would change. I guess like what, his crew wouldn't have cool makeup anymore? It's stupid because the whole point is that he's like, you know, all the normies, and we don't have to worry about real humans. We're different from them. Who cares if a couple more of them die? And it's like, what are you talking about? You're a real human. Like, you're a normal human. What, because you're irradiated now? It's like you haven't been treated differently for that. You were treated differently because you killed a bunch of people immediately. And I understand, right? If my wife was killed and my son was killed in front of me, and then I was forced to rub my hands inside their dead bodies and then tossed into a chamber and irradiated to the point that I nearly died but came back a weird skeleton man, sure, I'd be pretty pissed off, and I'd probably turn to like some form of crime as a way to get by. But they never really get into how that like mentally affects him and why he turned to crime specifically. Like, I get it's like an outlet, but he completely like 180s his personality from this dude who's trying to cure cancer because his dad died of cancer and his wife's parents died of cancer too, and therefore he needs to solve it but not sell it to an oppressive ruling country because his wife was oppressed in her nondescript country she's from. Therefore, he can't do that bad immoral thing to immediately running organized crime. Again, it's a pretty horrible life to be put through, and I understand. I'm not saying it's he wouldn't do that. I'm saying like, yeah, I can understand it, but it just doesn't feel very like thought-provoking. There's never a point where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. If I were to try to rewrite this character and I were to try to make him a little bit more like fitting to the themes of the show, I think it would be more interesting if instead of a wife and kid who doesn't really come into play in the show other than just that one episode where he happens to hang out with a kid for 5 seconds, if instead he was the only one with cancer. He had cancer, and it was causing him to look sickly. If it was causing him, his hair's fallen out, and he looks pale. He looks like sullen. He just every time where he walks around, people give him this look of like almost fear and almost disgust. And as much as they try to hide it behind, oh, I'm sorry, you know, like you're going through this, and I'm praying that you get better, and I hope that everything's okay. He can tell that they are uncomfortable with him, and they don't like looking at him. They don't like being reminded that people out there are sick or worse than they are. And so he's desperately trying to find a cure, and that's why he turns to the crime boss, because he's like, no, I need to get rid of this cancer. I need to be something without this cancer, because it's ruining my life, not just because I'm dying. It's ruining any chance I have to live. Even no matter how long I live, this is no life to live, right? And so he goes through the same process where it's like, you know, he wants to come up with a solution, but then ends up like, I think it would prefer it if it was just that he couldn't find a solution, and then the mob boss got impatient and just said like, we're cutting off your funding, and then he would try pushing back, and he was like, no, fuck you, doctor, and he pushed him into the machine. That'd be more interesting, I think, than like is selling it to some other country. The only reason I think that would come into play is if you were to try to connect it to the idea that he doesn't like that the princess could be an impressive leader, and he doesn't like oppressive leaders, but they never bring it up, so it doesn't really matter. Whatever. Either way, him getting put into the machine and turned into phosphorus, turned into this skeleton man would be interesting if he was like, oh, I see now, I'm the cancer. And maybe that's who I was all along. And my humanity was just some sort of disguise I was wearing. I was trying to use to make people like me more, but I don't want people to like me more. I am death. And that is all I am, and that's all I should ever be. And death is the most pure thing out there. It'll come for everybody. And it doesn't hide behind false pretenses, and it doesn't try to make itself look pretty and appealing to other people. It's terrible and awful, and that's who I want to be. Like, that to me would be interesting. I feel like that would be a more interesting story than just the normal, usual, oh, my family was killed. Like, why do we have to bring in another wife to kill just to make this man like feel tragic? We could talk a lot about the women in the show and the way they're treated, and I will, but in this instance especially, it really felt like they were just writing him a wife just so they could kill her off, and I think that's a little lame. And obviously they have the kid too, but like especially with the wife, it was like, ugh, like he really felt the need to make her like specifically like non-white and from like some oppressive country and then just murder her. Like, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. Speaking of women, let's talk about Nina. Nina's story, I think, was, for the most part, it wasn't terrible. I thought it was interesting. I don't think they explored as much, again, the idea of like, you know, if she's someone that's meant to represent people living with like a disability. They didn't really get into that, because I feel like that's the closest analogy, right? Like, you know, she was born a little different and now she needs something to help like get around, and people are treating her worse because of it. Like, I don't know. They could have done maybe a little bit more with that concept, but whatever. I do think it's odd that she ended up in Bel Rev for doing nothing. Like, I'm not saying that Amanda Waller wouldn't do that, but like, didn't her dad have like friends in the scientific community and like an estate that he would have left for her? I don't know. I know it's a little nitpicky, but I feel like it would have been better if we maybe just put in like one scene of like the mom coming in after like Nina's been like captured, and like it's like, oh, all of your husband's assets now go to you. Like maybe he just forgot to update his will, and now she's like, oh, well, in that case, can we get rid of Nina? Because I don't want to take care of her. And then if Argus comes in and is all like, yeah, we'll take her off your hands for you. Don't worry, we'll take her away real good. And she goes, okay, and just signs away like her daughter's rights. That would be, I think, a little bit more interesting, you know, because then we get to see like a follow up on what exactly happened to the mom, and then we also can like see how she ended up with the Commandos because they leave it like very vague. It's not 100% necessary, you know. If I can imagine that that's what happened, then that's probably what happened. But it is a little weird because again, she's also human. Obviously she's a metahuman now, but she still is a human and in theory has rights. You know, she was born in the old US of A. She should have rights. I don't know why Waller doesn't think she has rights now, but she just apparently she doesn't. The story I do have an issue with though is the brides. Now, I'm going to cover the Bride and Frankenstein here because obviously their stories are very heavily linked. I got big Poor Things vibes from it, but not in a good way. Like, I like Poor Things. I think it's an interesting movie. Like, Victor's her dad, right? Like, he raises her and she has, like, the brain of a child. And then he has sex with her and we never, like, stop to go, like, can she give consent? Is that something her brain is developed enough to do? I don't think it was. But we never go into that. And it's kind of weird because we never go into her feelings and the fact that like this was her like father figure and he had sex with her and she wasn't really able to like process what was going on. Like they never talk about her emotions. They never really like show her reacting in any way other than frustrated. And they treat it almost like she's just mad because she loved him. And that's weird because again, that was like her dad. So it's just weird. It doesn't feel like it's good for her character as like a woman to be like, oh, you killed my lover. Like I don't think they should have been lovers. I think it would have been a lot better if he was just like a father figure and Eric was just mad because he was giving her more attention. Like he could easily read into it as a romantic relationship without it literally being a romantic relationship. I think it'd be more interesting if Victor didn't see her that way and Eric still reacted like, oh, you want her, don't you? And he killed him for it. That to me would be a lot more interesting. Because I think Eric is honestly like the most interesting character in the show. Like I do think like the Bride can be interesting, but in the way that Eric is written, I feel like he's the most interesting character because he's a perfect representation of how you can create like monsters out of men. And the idea of like telling them that they're entitled to something and that they're entitled to a woman and that she's literally built for you. And then when she doesn't want to be there, then his immediate like flipping off the handle and just becoming this like unbearable monster. And then he immediately puts up this facade like he's just a nice man who's just trying to do the right thing, isn't he? And he talks like he's some sort of eloquent aristocrat, like speaking in these strange verbose like phrases. When in reality, he's just a brutish child. He doesn't understand anything that he's saying. He doesn't know anything about anything. He doesn't understand the references to movies he's making, but he thinks he's so clever and so smart. But he's not. And I think that's really interesting. He's bad. He's a bad dude. But it's interesting to see that how he's encouraged into that bad behavior as a result of his upbringing and as a result of the fact that he is like a creature of sorts. He is not a literal man, but he was built to be one. And that to me is interesting. Then he's barely in the show. Like, he's not part of the Commandos, and then he's just sort of in the background. And we give him one episode of a flashback that honestly I felt like it didn't really give much more context to his character. I liked those moments, but with how little runtime the show has, I don't think it was necessary. So we have those moments, and then he shows up and he gets shot, and then we see, of course, he's still alive, because of course he's still alive. We didn't see him die, so therefore everyone who doesn't die is still alive. Rick Flag, Clayface, G.I. Robot, Frankenstein, they're all alive, unless we literally see them get shot point blank in the head, because that's the only way we can see things in the show, is point blank deaths. He's just there, and it's frustrating, and I'm sure like, oh, well, he'll be important in later seasons, but like, why couldn't he have just been part of the team now? Or better yet, why couldn't he have been like Alana's bodyguard or something? That would have been kind of interesting. Or maybe he worked for Cersei? I don't know. Something to tie him to the plot other than he just happened to overhear about this situation and then just showed up and sort of inserted himself into the plot. So yeah, I think that there could have been a lot more done with the bride's reaction to things. I think she deserved more time to be more than just the like, I got close to someone once and they died. I don't know if I can get close to anyone again. Especially because at the end they know that happens. Like she gets close to Nina and then Nina dies and she just does it like she's just fine. Like she's mad. She kills the princess over it, but also like, I don't know, then they're okay with just, she's like, oh, I can just continue running this team. Sure, why not? It's like you would think that her reaction would be, see, this is why I don't get close to people. I don't want to be a part of this group anymore because every time I get close to anyone, they die. Like that would be kind of interesting, but instead they just don't do that. And she's just fine. I don't know, she got her revenge, I guess, so it's okay. And she thinks she killed Frankenstein, but also, like, how many times has she probably thought she killed Frankenstein over the course of, like, centuries? So, I don't know if she 100% actually thinks that he's dead. In which case, also, why wouldn't she have shot him sooner? I don't understand that either. Why didn't she shoot him in the chest sooner? Or in the head? Like, can she not shoot him in the head? It was just a weird moment where she just like shot him and was just like, okay, bye. It's like, well, I thought this guy's been like chasing you for like centuries. Either you think you killed him, in which case you should probably be a little bit more like, ha, finally, I got you. Or you know you didn't kill him, in which case, why wouldn't you try a little harder? Like, I know you're in a mission, but I don't know. Phosphorus is right there. Just be like, hey, Phosphorus, can you quick like melt this guy's brain? And I'm sure you'd probably be like, okay. And then just, that would be the end of it. But no, they just move on. It's dumb. It's dumb, and it feels like there's just not any thought behind what's happening. It's just like, things happen and then we move on. I could go into Flag and Waller and Economos, but I don't know. Who cares? Who cares? Honestly, I don't think they need to be in the show. They were annoying. They didn't feel like they were doing anything other than just like repeating themselves over and over again. And Flag's relationship with Alana. Okay. Now this is where I get like into my actual issue. Like this like real like issue I have. This show is so hypocritical about how it talks about women. Because there's so much unnecessary. There's moments of women being ogled over. And not by like other characters, but by the camera. The camera constantly feels the need to have these animated women's butts on screen for no reason other than just for them to be there. We need to see their asses. We need to see their freaking boobies. We need to see all of it, man. We need to see every little moment. It's like, why? Why do we get this? What's the point? And then they have the gall. They have the gall to have Waller try to call out Cersei as if like, oh, why do you always dress so sexual? Motherfucker, you guys drew her that way. There is no like, oh, she chose that. You drew her that way. You felt the need to make her overly sexual. You didn't have to do that to her, but you felt the need to, along with everyone else. Why do we need to see Alana get her ass slapped by a weird incel? Why do we need to see that? What does that tell us about anything? What, that the incels are bad? I know they're bad. They're incels and Nazis. I don't care. I don't need to see them do it. You could have easily had like an off-screen, you could just had her over his shoulder and she just reacts and then like you hear the smacking noise and that would have just been just as effective. But what's frustrating is that they animate that scene and you know what the incels are going to do with that scene? I'll give you a hint. It's not reflect on their ways and change their minds about how they act. No, they're probably just going to jerk off to it. So like, what's the point? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to say, that this is bad? You're not accomplishing that. You're just giving them more fodder to add to their Rule 34 folder. And I think it's a little irresponsible. And I know it's just like, oh, it's a cartoon, who cares? But my point is that they're trying to critique it. They're trying to make fun of incels. They're trying to say that, oh, aren't men so awful? And then they do this shit and act like somehow they're like above it all, and they're not. And that annoys me. And I'm not saying that they 100% think that, but I am saying that like if you're going to bring up that kind of stuff, then you should understand you're painting a target on your own back too. And that more people should probably call you out on that behavior and not just gloss over it like it's fine. Like, no, why do we need to see the bride's outfit all torn up? Why do we need to see a freaking prison guard reading a porno magazine and zooming in on the little naked metahumans, whatever bullshit that they were doing? Why did we need to stop at like some random prostitute bar just so that we can watch yet another woman get assaulted by another man just so that we can reiterate that, look, isn't it bad when that happens? I don't need to see it over and over and over again. It's not fun watching women get attacked over and over and over again, especially in a show where it's like the only reason you're doing it is, I guess, so that you can have some sort of hate boner that you can kill off their assaulters. Like, that in itself is weird and kind of gross, and especially when a lot of men are involved in the projects. Like, I know James Gunn wasn't involved in everything, and I know it's not exclusively men, but it's also one of those things where it's like, it doesn't feel like some revenge story. It just feels like people trying to virtue signal almost. And I think that's stupid, because like, we shouldn't have to virtue signal about being above incels. Like, incels suck. And especially when like a show like Peacemaker did such a good job of analyzing how like toxic masculinity can affect people. We can do better. I know we can do better. So why are we doing this? It just felt lazy. It felt lazy and it felt kind of crass and stupid. Which, going back to Alana, yeah, I don't think her motivations make any sense. It's like, why do we show Grodd for that one scene? What was the point of that? Because at first I thought, oh, Cersei's vision is real, but Grodd's controlling Alana. But no, Alana's just bad. And it's like, you know, we've seen this character go through a lot, but apparently she's just some temptress who seduced Flag and used her sexuality to like get a hold of him. And then she just needed to be murdered because she was awful. And there's no exploration of why, like, for the sake of a plot twist that wasn't even a good twist. Because, like, why is Cersei there? And this is probably a good enough time to segue into it. Let's talk about the plot. Right off the bat, I think that a big thing that we should do is avoid writing ourselves into a corner with our other DC characters. Like Gunn said how when like revealing Batman in the one shot with Phosphorus, he kept telling them like, oh, reveal less. I don't want to commit to anything yet. And that's good. But like, why are we showing Superman? Why are we showing Starfire, Blue Beetle? Like, why are we showing all of them in their weird, like, flash forward sequence, whatever prophecy thing of them all dead? Why are we bothering with any of that? Why are we showing Grodd for no reason? Why are we bringing Clayface into this? Why are we bringing this, like, endless characters from the wider DC universe? And most importantly, what is Cersei doing here? Because when you bring in Cersei, and I don't know anything about this Wonder Woman, I don't know anything about them specifically, and their history or anything like that. The only thing I know is based off of what I assume their relationship carries over from most adaptations and, like, the comics, right? So Cersei and Wonder Woman don't get along, sure. But Wonder Woman in general, if a villain approached her and was like, hey, I come in peace, I have a bad big prophecy I gotta tell you about, Diana would be like, I'll hear you out, but I got my eye on you. Because, she's a superhero. That's her thing. Superheroes aren't immediately jump to violence, unless you're like, I don't know, Batman. But even Batman doesn't always do that. But still, point is, she'd probably hear her out. Cersei, apparently in this universe, has made accurate predictions before. So she says, I have an important prediction I need to tell you about. And if Cersei's like, you don't believe me? You know what Wonder Woman could just do? Wrap the lasso of truth around her. And then she'd know for certain that, yes, Cersei's telling the truth about this. And I'm positive that Cersei should know that. Because why wouldn't she know that? And in fact, I'm almost 100% certain that if this played out normally, and it wasn't some writer's weird, like, they just decided this is the story for Creature Commandos, if this played out in universe, that's probably what she would do. But instead, we don't see that because they don't want to commit to Wonder Woman, because they can't do that because then there wouldn't be a story. So, like, why write yourself into a corner here where Cersei's the villain in a show where it doesn't make any sense for her to be the villain? Let's just axe that. Throw her out of the way. We don't need her to be part of this show. It's dumb. And also, like, people were complaining about, like, the power scaling and, like, how the Creature Commando was able to defeat her. And, like, I don't really care about power scaling, but also, like, I do kind of see where they're coming from. She's a very huge threat, and to be like, oh, well, she couldn't move her hands because the weasel attacked her too fast. It felt a little, again, lazy, a little bit, just a teensy little bit, but whatever. Let's get rid of her just because it doesn't really make sense for her to be there. And while we get rid of her, let's also get rid of Waller and Argus and all that. In fact, let's just cut the US entirely out of this picture and make this entirely set in Pakistan, because it's kind of boring to see the Suicide Squad again. In general, it'd be nice to see more Suicide Squad stories. I'm not saying, like, we shouldn't see any more stories. I'm just saying that, like, we've seen these things play out, like, so often. Like, if I had a nickel for every single DC R-rated TV show that came out in the last 6 years that was about a group of, like, misfit, not quite villains, not quite heroes who all have to come together to reach a common goal, and it also had a robot person that kills a bunch of Nazis. It also starred Alan Tudyk and also featured the song People Are Strange by the Doors in it. I'd have 2 goddamn nickels. How the hell does that happen? How the hell is it that specific? And Doom Patrol was way better. So, and I'm not saying that it's inherently a bad thing, but it's not just that it's Doom Patrol. It's also the fact that we got, like, Harley Quinn, we got the Kite Man Show, we got Peacemaker, we got the Suicide Squad. Like, there's just this endless plethora of these, like, R-rated, not quite hero, not quite villain projects, and a lot of them have Alan Tudyk in it. And I'm not saying that they're bad. Honestly, most of them are pretty solid. It's just Creature Commandos does not have the room to continue to just, like, ride out the coattails of that wagon and pretend like it doesn't have to try very hard because, like, well, it's just a fun premise. It's like, no, you should try a little harder, especially if you're going to be the launching point for the DCU. Let's cut all that nonsense. Let's cut all the connections. Try to make it stand on its own a little bit more. Instead, let's say that we're in Pakistan and Princess Alana creates her own team to protect her because she did hear about Waller's Suicide Squad that was now made public. Now, obviously, she's in a different country. It's a smaller country. She's allowed to do whatever the hell she wants. She's a monarch, so she doesn't have to worry about human rights laws. And we should specifically make it clear that she is a fairly oppressive leader from the get-go. She's not some innocent princess. She is a lot more focused on the concept of perfection and the concept of her elitism and what it looks like to be a good model society. And if you want to say she took inspiration from her associations with America, I think that's fine. No, I want to be more like those cool Americans with their, like, pretty buildings and those pretty supermodel looks and all that. And I hate that my country is full of these poor peasant people with the disgusting looks. I think that would be interesting. We have it so that she creates her own little Creature Commando squad, so that way she can have some sort of protection against a neighboring country. And that neighboring country can be Vlatava. Vlatava? I don't know how you pronounce it. But that's the country that in the DC universe is run by Count Vertigo. And I think that would be really interesting because we could bring in a big part of DC lore. You know, he's an important character. Well, important-ish character, you know, he's a recurring villain in a lot of stuff. There's this guy, Count Vertigo, he's in charge of a neighboring country, and he wants to invade, kill Alana, and take over the country for himself. That's fine. That seems like a thing Count Vertigo would do. It makes sense for his motivations as a character. It fits within the pre-established lore. We don't have to wonder where the rest of the Justice League is, because this is like an internal, like, conflict between two countries. It's not like a literal supervillain just charging in to kill some random dignitary. It'd be too messy for a hero to try to step in, you know? So it makes sense. So we can have it that all of the commandos are from Pakistan, or at least in the area. Even if we need to cut Weasel, I think it's fine. We can cut Weasel. But GI Robot, it's easy. Just say after the war he was just left there. That'd be kind of interesting. Or maybe he was captured by Nazis and he was just locked away for like decades until Pakistan like found him and dug him up, and now he's just sort of like reprogrammed as a bodyguard for her. I think that would work fine. We can have that she has the bride, if she's just someone who lives there, and then she just finds her and captures her. Dr. Phosphorus we can keep that cancer concept from earlier, but we can just, or maybe even we could say he's from Gotham. I don't know. I'm not really attached to that concept, because then he would just be locked away in Arkham. But if we want to include Dr. Phosphorus and we want to make him stand out, we want to not worry about these things, then sure, we'll just go with the cancer story. We'll just say that he just tried to like get his project funded by some gangster inside of Pakistan in some random city, and then he ended up becoming Phosphorus that way. Alana, we can also keep similarly. We can just have it that he was just some random scientist in the country who was experimenting on his daughter, and then she ended up becoming a fish lady. And then we can have it that, they saw her as an abomination and locked her away. We don't have to bring up the concept of human rights, because this is a foreign nation that can have its own rules. It's completely fictional, and if it's run by some sort of oppressive monarch, then none of those things have to come up. She could just be arrested for the sake of being arrested. So all the story fits just fine. Everything would be just fine. We can set up this concept that there's like this aristocracy in Pakistan, and maybe Nina came from it, but then she ended up being like trapped inside the lower regions. And we can say that Victor Frankenstein was part of that aristocracy in his day. It all fits perfectly fine. Don't worry about the backstory there. And then for Eric specifically, we can have it that he actually works for Vertigo. That way, we don't have to worry about him and Bride fighting as members of the same team, but we can still have their conflict be relevant to the story. So he can be working for Count Vertigo, and he can be part of his invading force trying to take over, and the Commandos are simply in charge of protecting Alana. And over the course of the show, we can see them all begin to get frustrated by having to protect this lady, and then we can eventually have a twist and find out that, of course, maybe Vertigo is look, Alana is awful. Or maybe we can even find out that both him and Alana are awful, and they're just fuck it. And they end up killing her, and then maybe they're we're going to kill Vertigo next. That would be an interesting setup for season 2. My point is that even with the lost minutia of the plotline, because I understand some people could be well, what are we supposed to do for several episodes? But it's I don't know, man. Have them go on missions and stuff, reconnaissance. Have them just it's only 7 episodes. I'm sure we could come up with enough plotline to fit those 7 episodes or whatever. We don't need to cover the backstory endlessly, but if we're just going to continue to keep the backstory thing, we don't need to travel to the country and back to America and then have Clayface be there and have this plotline go there and this plotline go there, blah blah blah. This endless confusing. Why don't we just have scenes of the characters just interacting with each other, so that way we can buy that they're becoming friends? Why can't we just have moments of them just going on a mission together, and that's just it? The mission is to go into Vlatava and try to find Count Vertigo and to try to kill him. And eventually they find out that Vertigo is maybe either he's overprotected and they can't kill him, or they try to kill him and then he reveals that he's no, Alana's the one that's awful and she wants to try to start World War III or something. That might be, again, we can keep those ideas there, but actually set them up in a way that it's not this stupid back and forth endless twist thing where it's no, she's evil, but she's not evil, but she is evil. That wouldn't be necessary. We could just establish that Vertigo wants her off the board because he's worried she's going to start an international conflict because she is kind of unhinged, and we could see hints of that setting up, and so it's not just an out of nowhere twist. We understand that she's unhinged, and the Commandos will be forced to decide whether or not they should go back and try to kill her instead and work for Vertigo, or if they should continue working for her. By the end of the show, they could kill Alana and be well, why don't we just work for ourselves then? And that would be more interesting. I think that'd be more interesting. Season 2 could be now they're going after Vertigo, because they're no, he's still an asshole. And we can have it where it's the Bride and Eric have this sort of endless fight back and forth, and either it needs to end with an actual resolution of some sort. Eric either dies or he gives up or something, or they need to make up or some sort of something climactic, not just him just getting shot in the chest and that just being the end of it, because it's stupid. Obviously these are not super in-depth detailed rewrites. I'm not trying to say, oh, look at me, I rewrote a whole TV show. I didn't, but I'm trying to show how if we change the premise of the show, we're not actually leaving that much out. I don't think really most of the parts that we would leave out would be missed, because they're not really there for any reason other than just, I guess, to build up the DC universe more. It's we don't really need Cersei. There isn't really resolution to her. She shows up after her vision scene. She never shows up again. It's okay, well, that's that, I guess. So it's we don't really need to see that. And Clayface is just sort of there, so we really don't need to see that either. And Waller and Economos are just their usual selves, so it's we're going to see them in other projects anyway, so what difference does it make? And Rick Flag Sr. is so boring, so who cares? Like, no disrespect for Frank Grillo, but like, I don't care. I don't care that Rick Flag had a dad and that he's still alive and that he's being weird and horny. I don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. And then also we can drop that stupid like attempt to try to criticize incels because I think that's dumb. I think it's much more interesting if we're talking about the Creature Commandos to talk about the perspective that they are being treated as outcasts because they look different, rather than going into some sort of contrived half thematic through line of, oh well, men are awful, without ever really talking about why men are awful, even though you have like good opportunity to get into why masculinity is kind of a prison and how like toxic masculinity has pervaded all of our cultures and how patriarchy exists everywhere. You could have talked about that, but you didn't. Instead, you just made these half-assed comments and then acted like you were so snarky and cool for making these comments while also degrading women constantly. So no, drop all of that. Leave at best to be part of like Frankenstein's stories. Like him and the bride, if we want to talk about there, that's fine. But otherwise, cut it out and just make it a story about outcasts. Make it a story about people who are seen as lesser than in society and how they're like criminalized and how they're chased away because they just simply seem different. And for Phosphorus, that can mean that he is like a sick patient and that he's someone who like very clearly is afflicted, but people don't like the idea of like dealing with people who are sick and them having medical issues. For Nina, we could tie to the same vein where it's like her having a disability of sorts. It's something where it's like people like treat her worse because of that. They see her as lesser than. I mean, for Weasel, he's just, I don't know, he's a dog man, but still, point is that he's like a mongrel of sorts and like people don't respect him for that reason. For the bride, they see her as property and they don't think that she should have her own opinion on things. And for GI Robot, they also see him as property and that he's literally a robot. So it's like there's no thought process behind it, and that can be a larger commentary on the way that we treat men like monsters. Like this works fine, sets up the door perfectly for more stories that are like it. But instead, we only get those half attempts, and it feels kind of lazy. I'm never good at editing videos, but that's just my personal thoughts. Thanks for watching. Don't show this to James Gunn. This is not a call out. I don't. He's on social media a lot. I know he's not going to see this. I know most people aren't going to see this, but like, please don't show this to James Gunn. Anyone who does watch this. I'm working on an Arrowverse retrospective video. I have it recorded. I have like a board over here. You can see there's like yarn and everything. I have that set up, and I'm going to edit it soonish. So hopefully that should be up within a reasonable amount of time. If not, look forward to it, I guess. So thanks for watching. Subscribe or something. Have a good night. Bye.